I'm Dreamy.
I am Foxy.
So let's get started and see where we're going to take you today. Welcome back to Dreamy and Foxy's UK adventure as we travel to the 3 highest peaks in Britain and 3 of the loveliest cities that the UK has to offer. Obviously, it has been quite a while since our last video, but in addition to my natural talent for procrastination, plus the indulgences of the holiday season, we had to deal with the increasing frailty of our beautiful chocolate Labrador Bob, who featured ever so slightly in our first video. Unfortunately, Bob's arthritis, increasing pain and discomfort, as well as his other health issues, led to us losing him last September when he ventured off to join his brother Solo and best friend Obi the cat at the Rainbow Bridge. I have done a short video with some of our photos and memories of all 3 of them, together with a few appearances of our 2 remaining cats, Luke and Leia. So before we get started, just a reminder that, although I do try to fact check, mistakes are bound to happen. Prices were all correct as of June 2022 unless specified otherwise, and of course if there are any mistakes it is all Foxy's fault. But now, back to today's trip to Loch Ness and Fort Augustus. It was just a short journey today as we travelled up the A82 along the northwestern shore of Loch Ness until we reached Drumnadrochit, a distance of about 26 miles or 42 kilometres. Then we came back down the A82, stopping in Fort Augustus for lunch, around 19 miles or 30 kilometres, before finally heading back to Invergarry, which gave us a round trip total of 53 miles or 85 kilometres. When you say Loch Ness, most people would immediately think of the monster, which allegedly dwells within the dark waters of the loch. But the loch is much more than just a monster story. To look at its history, we need to pull back a little and look at the Great Glen. This huge valley, visible from space, splits the highlands diagonally from Fort William up to Inverness and was caused by glaciers during the last ice age. Not only that, but it also contains the most prominent fault line in Britain, the Great Glen Fault. And looking at this photo taken from space, you can see how much the land on either side of the fault line has shifted, possibly as far as the exposed length shown here, since the development of the fault around 400 million years ago. The glaciers carved the land well below the present-day sea level, so as they retreated and melted, they left a series of deep lakes, the main ones shown here, with the most famous of them, of course, being Loch Ness. Now, Loch Ness could not claim to be the largest loch by surface area, that would be Loch Lomond, nor is it the deepest loch, that's Loch Morra, which incidentally has its own monster legend called Morag. However, it is the largest body of water in the UK, containing 263 billion cubic feet of water, more than all the lakes in England and Wales put together. This huge mass of water means that the loch never freezes and remains at a year-round temperature of about 5 degrees Celsius. Not exactly pleasant for an afternoon dip. The water visibility is also poor due to the peaty particles carried from the surrounding hills during those rare rainstorms that Scotland only occasionally experiences. This, of course, means that there could be anything hiding in its depths. Which brings us to the most famous thing about Loch Ness. Not the fact that on its southern shores was the home of notorious occultist Aleister Crowley, a house that was bought by Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page and which was destroyed in an unexplained fire. No, of course we're talking about the Loch Ness Monster. There have been unexplained sightings of something within the waters of Loch Ness since 565 AD. An Irishman, St. Columba, travelling through the region, came upon a burial on the shore of the River Ness. It was claimed that the dead man had been attacked by a monstrous water beast, As it was not the season for haggis, who don't really like the water anyway, Columba was curious enough to direct one of his followers to swim across the river. A monster approached, but as Columba stepped forward, making the sign of the cross and declaring, "You shall not pass." No, hang on. That was Gandalf. Oh yeah, Columba said, "Go no further. Do not touch this man. Go back at once." And the creature fled. Further sightings in the 1800s were reported in the Inverness Courier, a local newspaper, and there were also some reports in the early 20th century, but it wasn't until the 1930s that Nessie mania really took hold. 1933 saw a couple report a beast with a large body and long, thin, wavy neck cross the road in front of their car and head into the loch. The 1934 surgeon's photograph caused a furore and a lasting obsession with Nessie, as the monster quickly became known, which lasts today and has proved lucrative to the area. That famous photo has been debunked, but the myth lives on. Some claim that Nessie is a plesiosaur, a long-necked aquatic dinosaur, which is perhaps unlikely as the loch did freeze during previous ice ages. But Loch Ness does have unexplored depths after all. It's also believed that the modern-day Nessie is an adaptation from the myth of Kelpies. These were monstrous water horses that drowned unsuspecting folk after luring them onto their backs. The naysayers believe that sightings are either fevered imaginations, outright hoaxes, publicity stunts, or as a result of a peculiar visual effect referred to as the Loch Ness mirage. As the loch stays at mostly the same temperature, if the outside air is much warmer than the water, such as in the summer, or much colder, such as in winter, it can distort the image of objects on or in the water. This tends to elongate the image vertically, causing, for example, a water bird to look much larger than it is, with a more elongated neck. Large sturgeon, one of which was claimed to be 12 feet in length, have also been caught in the loch, which could easily explain some of the sightings. Whatever the truth, despite numerous explorative dives and sonar soundings, nothing has been proved about a monster in the loch. But, there again, Nessie could just be a shy beastie. One place in particular has made the most of the Nessie phenomenon, and apologising once again for my pronunciations, Drumnadrochit in the centuries pre-Nessie hosted many market and cattle auctions, and the local Balmacan estate employed much of the local population. It is positioned at a natural crossing point of the River Enric as it flows into Loch Ness. In fact, Drumnadrochit comes from the Gaelic for the ridge of the bridge, and the first stone bridge, built by Thomas Telford, was completed between 1808 and 1811. This allowed the village to serve as a focal point for the local community, and the town grew around the need for various lodging and farming-related buildings. The former town courthouse, which had also been an inn and a rent collection centre, is now home to one of the two Loch Ness centres in the village, and definitely the more professional and informative centre. Although reviews are mixed, many people have been blown away by the 1-hour audio-visual tour, which endeavours to explain the myth and the facts behind Nessie as you travel through the 8 rooms of the centre. Scottish Natural Heritage has endorsed the exhibition as a portal to the unique natural phenomenon that is Loch Ness. As well as the centre itself, guests can also book for guided boat cruises on the loch throughout March to November. Foxy vetoed a visit to the centre, and instead we wanted next door to browse the shop of the other Nessie experience in town, Nessieland. Unfortunately, we weren't too impressed with the giant volume of tourist tat, so we didn't even venture inside this one either. The exhibition includes display panels, photographs, static exhibits, and a multilingual documentary explaining the search for Nessie. There are also Loch Ness cruises available to be booked via their website on the Nessie Hunter, which offers 1-hour tours from April through to the end of October. So Drumnadrochit, inevitably with its popularity based around the presence, or otherwise, of the Loch Ness Monster, is perhaps a little tacky, at least on first glance. It isn't helped by Nessieland, to be honest. However, there are other gems within the village. The ruins of Urquhart Castle are nearby, and at the end of August, the village is the home of the Glen Urquhart Highland Games. There are also an astounding amount of places to stay nearby. 3 larger hotels and 2 smaller inns, as well as a hostel, perhaps not so surprising considering the amount of tourists. At its heart, Drumnadrochit is still a charming village with beautiful views over the loch, and you really can't visit the Great Glen area without at least a short stop here. I mean, just imagine if you saw the monster. On our way back to Invergarry, we stopped off in Fort Augustus, sitting on the junction of Loch Ness, the River Oich and the Caledonian Canal. Originally, it's believed the village was named after St. Commune, and only changed its name after a General Wade built a fort here after the Jacobite Rising of 1715, which he named for the Duke of Cumberland, Prince William Augustus. Despite changing hands frequently, it operated as a garrison for close to a century. In 1876, the site was passed from Simon Fraser, the 13th Lord Lovat, whose family had purchased the land in 1867, to a Benedictine order, and the monks not only established Fort Augustus Abbey, or more properly St Benedict's Abbey, but also a private boys' school, which operated until 1993, when declining enrolments caused it to close. Although it was then converted into a heritage centre, this did not generate sufficient profit, and the site reverted back to the Lovat family, who then sold it to a consortium including the naturalist Terry Nutkins. No doubt many British viewers of a certain age will know him from Animal Magic and The Really Wild Show. Subsequently, the Abbey was sold to the Santon Group, and the buildings were partly converted into apartments and renamed the Boys' Dormitory, with the remainder becoming a luxury hotel. Fort Augustus was lovely, and we had a cup of tea and possibly a bit of cake at a cafe at the side of the canal. We were also lucky enough to see one of the 5 canal locks in Fort Augustus open. We're showing the edited footage of this in this video, but I have also uploaded the full unedited video. The link will be down below. Although we didn't venture into them, both the Caledonian Canal Heritage Centre and the Clansman Centre were very busy. The former gives an insight into the history and operation of the canal, while the latter allows visitors to imagine clan life 500 years ago via a recreation of the interior of a Highland turf house. Opened in 1822, Thomas Telford's Caledonian Canal, although designed in part as a job creation project, was a major technological achievement involving 29 locks, 4 aqueducts and 10 bridges. Joining 4 locks of the Great Glen together, it spans a 60-mile passage from the Atlantic Ocean on the west coast of Scotland to the North Sea on the eastern coast, connecting Fort William to Inverness, although only around a third of this length is actually man-made. The idea of a watery passage from one coast to the other was looked at early in the 18th century, but in 1726 it was determined that it would not be feasible due to the effect of the landscape on wind patterns. James Watt surveyed the area in 1773, and again, although he calculated that it was possible, he believed that the winds around the locks made the whole thing problematic. By the time Telford formulated the plans to create employment in the area, which had been devastated after the Highland clearances, his canal was viewed as a favourable option rather than the perilous route around the north of Scotland. Of course, by the time that the locals had been trained and the extensive job completed, conditions had changed and the canal was no longer as vital as it had been expected. The endorsement of Queen Victoria, however, who took a trip along it in 1873, sparked the interest of tourists and travellers to the area, and the arrival of the railway at Fort William and Inverness, where trains were scheduled to connect with steamboat services, helped this influx of visitors. As well as offering a route for watercraft, the opening of the Great Glen Way in 2002 gave hikers and walkers a 73-mile scenic path from Fort William to Inverness. So that's it for our journey today. Hopefully you enjoyed this short foray to Loch Ness and Fort Augustus. If you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe to make sure you don't miss our next stop, which will be to the beautiful Isle of Skye. For further information on the places we visited today, check out these links. They'll also be posted in the description below.